lot of elections, and this was the worst that I've ever seen as far as slandering people, slandering each other, and all. So, good, bad, or indifferent, I'm glad that it's over. I'm glad that it's over, and then we can all get behind the president and come together, and hopefully he will get our divided country together. It's been divided too long. You know, it's divided families, it's divided coupleships, it's divided friendships, and it's, it's time for, and I believe the only thing that can the only thing that can bring us back together is the God of our understanding, and may we seek him now. And so I just wanted to talk about today about acceptance. I don't have any idea what your affiliation is, if you're Republican or Democrat or, independent, whatever. I've heard about that so much. I'm sick of those two terms. But anyway, I don't know. And this morning, I don't care. I don't care what any of us are. Who we are this morning are American citizens. We live in this United States. And, so many of us on this, and I can't take your inventory, but so many of us, the folks that I know, I'll just say that, we are some form of an addict. We have used some substance or behavior to ease the pain of living. And I've wondered what the relapse, if the relapse rate has been any higher during all of this, and if it will be now after the election. I don't know. But what I wanted to talk about this morning is acceptance. Regardless of which side that we're on, if we're on the side of, of the ones, the winners or the losers, what we all need to have is a little bit of grace for each other, a little bit of grace. And I don't know in your part of the country if it has not been down and dirty, but in our part of the country, it seems to have been the dirtiest election that I've ever been involved in. And and I started at age 18 volunteering at election sites, so I've kind of been around. So anyway, this morning we have, I don't know if y'all know Aaron Watson. He's a young country and western singer. He's pretty famous in our area, and he's famous in Texas. And he lives here right outside of Buffalo Gap. And he was on Facebook this morning, or Instagram, one of them. So anyway, what he was saying is, it was early in the morning, and he was watching the sun come up, and he said, well, it's almost kind of like, on Friday, it's finished, it is finished. And he was talking about how, the election has split people and split, friends that he knew, and, just kind of put a wedge between people, if they talked about the subject. And I liked what Aaron said. He said that we're all just a little dot in the universe. We're a little dot. And think about that. And it's all these little dots that make up all of the dots in the whole world. And if we can take care of our little dot and our little spot in the universe, and he went on to say the way we can do that is by being kind to others, helping the elders. I'm one, to help the elders, help orphans, help, get out and be friendly with, with neighbors. And we've got a little deal going here in Buffalo Gap that, there's nothing like a controversy in a small town, and the controversy is going to be settled, but it kind of gets everybody in an uproar, and that kind of when he was talking about that little dot, when we really think about, you know, at the end of the day, how important are we? How important am I? And my, beliefs, blah, blah, blah. I know in the eyes of God we're all important, but at the end of the day, I liked what he said. Let's just take care of our dot and then help other people. Don't invade their space around their dot, but know that each one of us have a right to have a place in the universe, regardless of who's, in charge of our government or whatever. And, what I'm hoping is that by Thanksgiving, all the families, everyone could get around the table. And if they haven't been speaking because of, differences of opinion in politics, maybe they'll drop the rock and get around the Thanksgiving table and talk about. I love for my kids to be around the table. And we usually either go to my son's, he has a suite at the Dallas Cowboy game, and we'll trade out. We go up there sometimes on Thanksgiving, and then we stay here. And all the kids wanted to be around Mama's table this year, and I don't think that speaks so highly of Mama. I think it speaks, that the Cowboys are not offered a whole lot this season. So, they just keep forgetting to show up, bless their hearts, so they're struggling. But nevertheless, I love to hear my adult children talk around the dinner table about their childhood, because, my husband was an alcoholic and I was an untreated Al-Anon, and I chased him up and down the highway and beat him up when he came home. I'd beat him up with the vacuum cleaner. But we had good days. We had good times. And sometimes I get to thinking that it was all the kids remember the bad times, but they don't. When they sit around the kitchen table and talk and laugh about the fun that they all had, that's why I know that they love to have Thanksgiving and Christmas at their mother's house. So anyway, enough of me. Misty handed me a quote that she read this morning, and I read it, and I thought, well, I'm going to read it to y'all. I thought it was pretty good. So it says, for everyone who is feeling a certain way this morning, please remember that that deep disappointments in life are common, but they're not typically fatal or final. They're not typically fatal or final. It is the courage to accept the things I cannot change, pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and keep going and keep going and moving forward that counts. So I like that. We need to pick ourselves up, brush ourselves off, regardless which side you are, and, let's get on with life. So this morning I wanted to talk about acceptance, and, every day, regardless of or no matter what's happening in the world, I don't know about y'all, but I need to practice acceptance, accepting those things I cannot change. And what I cannot change is people, places, and things. Now acceptance doesn't mean always agreeing with, just because we accept a person and accept, where they are at the time, doesn't mean we're agreeing with them. And I know in my husband's alcoholism, until I got to Al-Anon, and I spent 14 years in Al-Anon before my husband ever went to his first AA meeting. And what Al-Anon did for me is it taught me that alcoholism was a disease. He wasn't getting drunk at me. He wasn't punishing me. Wasn't any of that. It was a disease. And what I learned in Al-Anon is I learned to love the person, place, or thing that made me angry. Well, the person that made me angry was my husband, and the place that made me angry was his business or the nightclub where he drank, you know. So through Al-Anon, I learned to uh, this is the first time I learned about drawing a circle around myself and getting inside that circle and minding my own business. You know, that's called setting a boundary. So I'll be eternally grateful for Al-Anon, because through Al-Anon, I began to learn to love my husband in spite of his disease, and to realize he had a disease. And I remember it wasn't his last drunk, but it was getting toward probably the last 2 or 3 months of his heaviest drinking. I went up to him one day, and he was drunk, and I just put my arms around him and told him it was probably longer than that. It was probably a year before he sobered up. But anyway, I just told him I loved him, I cared about him, I knew that he had a disease, and that he wasn't bad, and awful. He was, had a disease, and that I loved him in spite of it. Well, he started crying, and that was the beginning. Like I said, I think it was about a year before he sobered up. But it took me getting out of myself and my little, narrow way of thinking, and getting some education about alcoholism. I did not know it was a disease. I thought he was drinking at me because I was fat, or I was this, or I was that. That is total self-centeredness. I didn't know the man was sick and needing to get well. I just thought me and him both were bad and we needed to get good. So by the grace of God, he did sober up. And when he passed away, he had 32 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. I made my way to Al-Anon in October of 1968. And so after a day like yesterday, or some weeks that we've been having, I think I need to double up on my Al-Anon meetings a little bit maybe. But anyway, I want to talk about acceptance. And acceptance involves acknowledging a situation, a fact, or emotion without necessarily agreeing with it or wanting it to be that way. That's what I had to do with my husband, to accept him exactly the way he was, whether he ever sobered up or not. I mean, that is what I had to do for my own recovery, is to love him where he was, accept him where he was, and not try to make him something that, I just thought if I cleaned that house better, if I kept those kids, Lord, they looked good going to school. But I kept thinking it was something I was doing, so I would, cook bigger meals, clean the house better. You could eat off the floors, and kept the kids. They looked like they stepped out of a bandbox. We were a looking good family. And we'd go to church down there at Wiley Baptist Church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Of course, he would be drunk on Saturday, and then he'd go teach Sunday school on Sunday morning until one of the students asked him, he said, "Mr. McCarty, do you have alcohol in your breath?" And so that's when he quit teaching Sunday school. But anyway, I didn't know that I needed to accept my husband exactly the way he was, whether he was drunk, sober, or in between, because I didn't know what he had was a disease, and I didn't know what I had was a disease. So acceptance, it's often means recognizing reality as it is, to recognize reality. This is real, folks, regardless of which side of the political, venue you're on, which side. The fact is we have a new president today, and he happens to be a Republican. Now, if you're not on that, if you're on that side, boy, you're celebrating till, if you're not, you might be a little sad. But, acceptance is about it's often means recognizing reality as it is, even if it's not what you desire. We just have to face reality, face reality. This is happening, this is real, and accept it, as it is. Now, there's another form of acceptance. It's called emotional acceptance. Emotional acceptance involves a much deeper emotional process when it comes to terms with something that may be difficult or painful. The acceptance is, oh my Lord, to accept, a death in the family, a child being sick, tragic things. Whether we like them or not, we have to accept things the way they are at this moment. And when we do, what it does, it creates an opening for change. When we can accept what is happening, the way it's happening at this moment, it creates an opening for change. As long as we're shut down and we're not going to accept this and we're not going to do that and blah, 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 who we are punishing is ourselves and those around us. So, we must come to terms with, it just popped in my mind. We have a dear friend that lives down the road up on the hill. She went to school with my daughters. They all played basketball. We've been good friends for years and years. And she was a nurse, and she retired, and her husband retired, and they bought this beautiful travel home, beautiful large travel home. And that's all they did was travel. They traveled. They'd come in long enough to see their grandkids and pack up, clean up and all, repack, and they'd be gone again. So I had seen them when they were home they'd come in from Florida, and they have to pass my house going back and forth to their home. And so I had seen them when we'd talked about, because they'd stop, they'd see me out in the yard, and they'd stop, and we would, shoot the breeze. And I said, now, where are you guys going this time? Well, they were going up to Ruidoso. It was hot summer at the time. They would go up there where it was cool and stay till it got cooler down here. And so our plans don't always turn out exactly the way we think they will. She was packed up, or in the house getting everything packed, and gone out to back up their pickup because they pulled it. And he was up under the van, up under this big trailer house thing. I mean, beautiful, beautiful. Probably $1 million deal, I don't know. Fixing a tire, long story short, it fell on him in an instant, killed him. So their entire world changed like that in an instant. And we all went up to see her, and Cam, bless her heart, she spent many hours up there with the family. We sent food, we did whatever, we could to support the family. And when we went up there, I noticed his wife, Dana, the one that was our friend forever, she was trying to console all of us. And, acceptance, it was a horrible thing for her to accept. And was she liking it? Absolutely not. And she would have breakdowns, and I'm sure she still has breakdowns. But in that moment, and I know what her spiritual life was like. And in that moment, she had accepted the unacceptable, the fact that her husband had died of a freak accident. So that's the kind of emotional process that I'm talking about that we go through with acceptance, that involves that deeper emotional process where you come to terms with something that is very difficult to accept and very painful. And it often requires us to look inside, which can lead to personal growth. I don't care what happens to us. You know, with every breakdown, there is a breakthrough. And you know, everything that happens to us is a learning process. And like I said, you know, I have all these little sayings. It's not what happens to us, it's how we go through it. It's how we go through it. That is what makes the difference. And so, I love the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and those of you that are familiar with the big book, you know what I'm getting ready to read on acceptance, and was written by. There was a chapter. This is a newer. This is the newest edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. This used to be on page 449. And this was written by, it was a chapter called The Doctor, the Alcoholic, the Addict. And he was a physician, but he liked his own medicine too much. You know, he was a little pill taker, he was an alcoholic. I had the chance of meeting him and his wife. He was a circuit speaker, and they were a delightful couple. But when he was in the midst of his drug addiction and alcoholism, he reports that he could be, you know, he'd go to the office, he could manage to be nice, you know, or cordial to people that worked for him and his patients, and, you know, until he could get home and drink. You know, he could hold himself together pretty good. But then he took everything out on his wife. And when he married her, she was just the love of his life. But then in the depths of his alcoholism, she became the enemy. And he treated her like the scum of the earth. And I've worked with lots of addicts, lots of alcoholics, drug addicts through the years. I'm one myself, and you know and I love working with families, because you've got to prepare the family, because you know they don't see a lot of the alcoholic and the addict when they're practicing the disease. You know, they're not present for family, you know, dinners, or if they are, they're, you know, not, you know, they're probably wasted or whatever. So there's not a lot of involvement in the progression of alcoholism and drug addiction. The addict does not have a lot of time and attention to focus on the family. So as wives, and I can only speak for myself, and I was a counselor working in the field, had been for several years when my husband sobered up. I knew this stuff. I taught this stuff. And, you know, I knew that when an addict or an alcoholic sobered up, the last people on the list for them to make amends to, or really to pay much attention to at all, is the family, particularly the wife or the husband. And that's just the way it is, because if an addict, and this includes eating disorders or any addiction that you have, in order to recover, we must put our whole time, attention into staying clean and sober. And so that means going to meetings, getting with other addicts. It takes a lot of work to get sober and stay sober. And what that means is here the family, and the chapter in the big book to the wives and to the family afterward, it talks about how a lot of times wives will get jealous. Of course we do, or did. You know, I knew the process. I taught it, and I worked with a lot of guys and gals, but mostly guys, and how their wives would be the last ones on the list for them to really, you know, get back with, other than sex. Now they would want the sex, but then they would go on down there. There was no companionship, connection. And this doctor that wrote this chapter knew that that's what had happened with him and his wife. His wife's name was Max. I love that, Max, M-A-X, Max. He described her as little. She's probably this little petite woman. And one day he realized that he had totally neglected Max, not so much in his drinking, but in his sobriety, because all of his time was going toward getting sober. So he wrote this chapter, and then he wrote this really toward the it's more toward the end, but he really wrote it in reference to his wife. I want to read it to you. I want to read you the whole package because I like to hear it. I hope you do too. I love this part. So what he says was, it helped me a great deal to become convinced that alcoholism was a disease, not a moral issue, that I had been drinking as a result of a compulsion, even though I had not been aware of the compulsion at the time, and that sobriety was not a matter of willpower. The people at AA had something that looked much better than what I had, but I was afraid to let go of what I had in order to try something new. There was a certain sense of security in the familiar. Boy, doesn't that strike home for those of us that are addicts? As sick as we get in our addiction, boy, we know how to do it, and we're familiar with it. At last, acceptance proved to be the key to my drinking problem. After I had been around AA for 7 months, tapering off with alcohol and pills, I love that, tapering off. Yeah, he sounds like a pill addict, tapering off. Not finding the program working very well, I was finally able to say, "Oh God, okay, God, it is true that I, of all people, strange as it may seem, and even though I didn't give my permission, really I am an alcoholic of sorts, and it's all right with me. Now what am I going to do about it? When I stopped living in the problem," I love this, "when I stopped living in the problem and began living in the answer, the problem went away." I just love that part. The problem went away when I started stopped living in the problem and started living in the answer. From that moment on, I have not had a single compulsion to drink. So this is the part about acceptance that I really wanted to read. And acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it's because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, such as an election or whatever, some fact of my life unacceptable to me, and I can find no serenity unless I accept that person, place, thing, or situation exactly the way it's supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake. Until I can accept my alcoholism, I cannot stay sober. Unless I accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as what needs to be changed in me and in my attitude. Shakespeare said all the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. He forgot to mention that I was the chief critic. I was always able to see the flaw in every person, every situation. I have that problem sometimes. Y'all ever have that? I mean, I can take somebody else's inventory in a heartbeat. And then I think I'm right. Then I have to go back and make amends. And I was always glad to point it out. Of course I was, because I knew you wanted perfection just as I did. AA and acceptance have taught me that there is a bit of good in the worst of us and a bit of bad in the best of us, that we are all children of God and we each have a right to be here. When I complain about you or me, I am complaining about God's handiwork. I am saying that I know better than God. So that's one of my favorite parts of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I suspect it might be some of yours. So who wants to share first? I've got me some heavy hitters on here. And if you don't volunteer, I'll call on you.